Hey, 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 another episode of the Anxiety Podcast. And this one is about something very frustrating to a lot of people. And I've been in conversations with so many people in our Cycle Breakers community and beyond, those that are reaching out and DMing me and giving me emails and sharing your backstories. I really appreciate it. I read all of them. Right now, at this stage of the game, I have the capacity to read all of them, and they really help inform the content that I'm making. So keep it up and keep up your questions. And I have one right here that I wanted to share with you. It's about this anxious-avoidant cycle. And it's a pattern that I see in a lot of people. And on today's episode, I want to dispel the myth, and I want to really share with you how to get to the bottom of this exhausting push-pull dynamic that so many people are going through, and they don't even know what it is, and they don't even have the language to put to it. So the anxious avoidant dance is kind of like a really, how do I put this? It's a really cosmic, it's a twisted cosmic game by the universe that we find ourselves in relational attachments. And it's not just romantic. In most relational attachments, in insecure relational dynamics, where it's kind of like a cat and mouse game, where there's a deep desire for connection. But what happens is there's an unconscious polarity that runs the universe. There's polarity that runs the universe. And this unconscious polarized dynamic is what creates initial magnetism. And the thing that creates that initial magnetism in the beginning, once there's a moment of depolarization, which I'm going to explain to you as we go, all of a sudden now it's a completely up dance, and it's frustrating, and it's anxiety producing, and you'll lose sleepless nights over it, and people get divorced over it. And it's what I call unconscious polarity. Polarity is a law of the universe. It's the yin and the yang. It's what creates magnetism. And what happens is we have anxious parts to us, anxious attached parts to us, and we have avoidant attached parts to us. This is a polarity within us. There are two anxieties that every single human being is confronted by because of the childhood dynamics. One part of us, because we had this experience of feeling sense of abandonment energetically, emotionally, physically from a parent figure that fears abandonment. So we have this one part of us that fears abandonment. And then we have this other part of us that took on responsibility, took on the lion's share of emotional labor, had to feel like they were parentified, or had to feel like they were taking care of everybody, taking care of mommy and daddy's emotions, or were kind of like what they call emotional incest, where you became kind of like a surrogate partner to your parent of the opposite sex because they were going through a divorce or whatever. This part of us has a fear of engulfment. Engulfment means consumption, fear of overwhelm, fear of being eaten alive, okay? So these two warring parts within us, the fear of abandonment and the fear of engulfment, are within our system. You either have an awareness of them and you know how to work with these energies, which most of us don't because we haven't been taught, or they get buried in our shadow. And those that have, and we all have both parts to us, but those that identify as anxiously attached, they're the ones who are constantly looking for connection, preoccupied, is he going to text me? No, why haven't you text me? I need you to tell me, constantly looking for reassurance. If you don't, you think that they're running away on you or you're going to be left alone. The part that this fear of abandonment shadow has taken over, those are the people who have anxious attachments. And the extreme example of those are called love addicts, love addiction. Okay, my ex, the reason why I'm telling you this is because I had to unpack my last relationship, which was a trauma bond, and my ex had a love addiction. Okay? Now, here's the neat thing about polarity. Number one, there's a polarity within all of us. So we have one part that has a fear of abandonment, and then the other part that's the fear of engulfment, the part that felt overwhelmed with responsibility, had to look after everyone else's emotions. This part of you just didn't ever have your emotional needs met by parent figures that really understood you. So you got the message that, sharing my feelings, or telling you how I feel, it's not gonna get me anywhere. So I'm just better off becoming an island and dealing with this shit on my own. We all have a part to us. Now, some of us who identify as avoidant attached have this anxious attached part, but it's hidden within our shadow. Does that make sense? Those of us who are anxiously attached, constantly looking for connection, more. You're not texting me enough. Why aren't you calling me enough? Why aren't you love bombing me? Why aren't you telling me I'm amazing? Do you love me? Do you care? You don't care about me, do you? That's the anxious attached part. Has the avoidant fear of engulfment part hidden in the shadows. The avoidant parts, which are constantly seeking space. I need space. I need space. Could we slow this down? Ooh, I don't want to get overwhelmed. These parts of us have anxious attached deep buried in our shadow. Okay, so why is this important? Because what happens is if we don't do the inner work necessary to be able to face and feel and become present to these younger parts of us that are in our shadow, what happens is they get acted out in relational dynamics. And you meet somebody and immediately there's an unconscious polarity that happens. Unconscious polarity within a trauma bond, especially if there's you're in a place of, you're down, you're going through some grief, you're going through a breakup, and lo and behold, you meet this person who now is like the light of your life and is like your rescuer. Every trauma bond begins with a co-rescuing operation. Damsel in distress, who just got hurt because of the narcissistic ex, goes on a date and starts talking about her victim story constantly. You haven't really healed from it, and you just talk about how your ex is a narcissist and poor me about your ex, and you haven't really worked through it, or you just went to a talk therapist and vented to all of your friends, and they all said, girl, he was no good for you. And so this victimhood that you haven't yet gotten over, you then, when you meet the other person, you attract a rescuer type. Does this make sense? Okay, so the damsel in distress, those people who ask the question, why do I keep attracting narcissistic types? One of the reasons, there's a few that I can go over. One of the reasons is because if you show up wounded as a victim from your past, constantly venting about how you're poor you, there's a certain type, healthy man, a healthy partner, healthy woman, healthy man would look at that and say, yeah, I wouldn't want to go there. There's a lot of drama. However, a wounded man who is, let's say you're the damsel in distress and I'm a wounded man at that same level of wounding, you tell me about poor this other person and you're in tears, now it activates my hero complex, my savior complex. A healthy guy would be like, you know what? This is a lot of work. You got some work to do. See you later. Call me when you're ready to open your heart. Whereas one who is wounded and needs some sort of a purpose is going to see you as a project, as a wounded bird to fix. That was me before. My last relationship began as that. This is why I teach this now. If you're not following my work, you're new to my work. I'm a retired chiropractor who was unknowingly in a trauma bond with a push-pull dynamic for 4 years, not knowing whether I should stay or go, because we would keep going through this exhausting cycle. I didn't know what it was. I didn't understand attachment styles. I didn't even know what a trauma bond was until it got abusive. We were abusive to one another. I became physically violent. We got to a place where the police were involved. I was in court. Like, it was a fucking mess. And I had to look and go, all right, how did I get into this situation? How can I make sure it never happens again? And if I can do 1 and 2, maybe I can find a partner and have a secure relationship, because I've never experienced that before. And if I could do 1, 2, and 3, which I did, my commitment was to leave chiropractic and just teach people how to break this exhausting dance. So welcome if you're new. So we have this anxious part of us that has a fear of abandonment, and we have this avoidant part of us that has a fear of engulfment. And this polarity is what's within us. And if I am still feeling victimized by a relationship that I'm not complete with, I'm going to show up in a relationship with you. Let's say we go on a date, and I'm just going to be like, my ex was a this, or she was a narcissist, or he was a narcissist. And what happens is I set the platform up for a rescue operation, which is a breeding ground for a trauma bond to occur. And what happens is, if you're the damsel in distress and I have this hero savior complex, which most of our narcissistic parts do, I'm like, great, I can be your hero. And then now I'm your hero. This is what I was. I was the hero to my ex because she had some mental issues, some emotional issues. She was stuck in her career. She wanted a bridge to another career, and she also rescued me. So it's a co-rescuing operation. She rescued me because I wanted to leave chiropractic. I had this gift, which was called the overview method, and it really helped people heal their past. Didn't know what to do about when I got triggered, but it's another part of the story. But I had this amazing ability to, based on all of the personal development work that I've done, to shift somebody's perception of their past and now release energetic blocks in their nervous system. And all of a sudden, their illnesses, their chronic pain, their digestive issues would be gone, and their relationships would heal, their depression would lift, their anxiety would lift. And so I was helping her with it, and she decided to help me as well. So she had a great business sense, so we kind of partnered up and became this co-rescuing operation as we moved into a new reality. Me leaving chiropractic for this new life of teaching, her leaving her marriage, same-sex marriage, her cafe, her sex working. She wanted to get out of, she was a sex worker as well. She wanted to get out of that, and she needed a bridge, and we just saw this was a perfect co-rescuing operation. And here's where it gets fun. Within 6 months to a year, 18 months, that's when a depolarization happens. But before then, everything is hunky-dory, isn't it? Where you have unconscious polarity. I was the pursuer. She was, submissively opening to me sexually. We had great sex. And the honeymoon phase goes from 0 to 6 months or 18 months. So there's a honeymoon phase for the first 6 to 18 months. But somewhere along the lines at the 6-month mark or the 18-month mark of a relational dynamic, the fantasy that we all have with relational dynamics when the sex is amazing and it's, oh my gosh, and you're pedestalizing one another and you love yourself. It's not like you fall in love at first sight. You fall in love with the idealized version and pedestalized version of yourself. That's really what happens in these trauma bonds. Secure love is slow, measured, but in our case, boom, we moved right in. Boom, we just started traveling together. You're going to move in after meeting you for 1 week. These are the breeding grounds of trauma bonds. And what happens is it's really good at first, but there's a moment, there's a place, there's a moment where a depolarization happens. And this is when somewhere along the line, when the fantasy shatters, there's a health crisis that comes up. There's an accident that happens. There's some sort of a stressor. There's something that breaks the fantasy where there's a disappointment. Tell me if you understand what I'm saying. There's a lack of respect. There is an inciting incident that all of a sudden shatters the fantasy of what you thought it was, and now shit gets real. This is the first moment of depolarization, where the feminine all of a sudden loses that femininity and she goes into her masculine, usually into more of a controlling, usually into resentment. The lean back energy turns into leaning forward, entitlement, anger, that kind of thing. And the masculine who was leading, this can be same-sex couples as well. So this doesn't exclude genders. I've worked with lesbian couples who the exact same dynamic was going. There was a masculine and a feminine, even in same-sex couples. So the masculine that was leading, there is a trigger that happens. There is something that breaks that polarity and it becomes depolarized. And now that trigger, let's say it's the avoidant, let's say a death in the family happened, let's say there was an accident, an injury, or some sort of a breakdown emotionally. Now that avoidant then feels not good enough, rejected, betrayed, and because of that feeling and not knowing what to do about it, not having the skills to regulate, not knowing how to become trigger proof and integrate with these younger parts, because when you get triggered, you suffer from an age regression. You fall back into a wound. Every time there's reactivity, you go into a wound. And that 8-year-old self of the avoidant, let's say, I'm just giving you the example, doesn't believe that their feelings matter. And so their only way to cope is to withdraw, is to hide. Sometimes if they have a nervous system that's really activated with trauma, they'll go into a freeze response and they'll go numb and they'll check out. Or this is a very kind of big problem in today's society. They'll go into pornography. They'll go into video games, some sort of a distractive, sedative numbness. They'll go into drinking. These are all coping behaviors to deal with the feelings after the trigger when they were depolarized. This is the second phase of the relationship. This is when the second phase begins. The first phase is called the honeymoon phase. This is when the power struggle begins. When the avoidant gets triggered, it could also happen after sex or deep intimacy. The avoidant feels tenderness, feels their heart opening, feels this deep care. Holy shit, I could get hurt. Holy shit, I could let this person in. Holy shit, I don't feel worthy and deserving of receiving. There are many reasons why the avoidant will start to shut down. And it all has to do with an inability to be with those emotions, not feel worthy and deserving. And so they go into a shutdown mode. And then when they shut down, their coping mechanism is to shut down. What ends up happening is, as we go through this loop, this negative cycle, their withdrawal then triggers the anxious attachment. And the anxious attached all of a sudden feels not important, not good enough, not loved, and abandoned, just like when they were young. So what's happened is that avoidant got triggered and regressed into a wound. And that wound, which is in what's called the shadow, which is our darker kind of like wounded parts that we've stuffed away that are behind our, not in plain sight, in our shadow, in our blind spots. These are our blind spots that get triggered. All of a sudden, the coping strategy, which is to sedate, to numb, to withdraw, because that's what an avoidant does, because their feelings are so overwhelmed and they've been conditioned to think that sharing my feelings is never going to get me a good outcome. I always get gaslit. They always make it about them. They always deny, or they make my feelings wrong. There's no point in me sharing, so I'm just going to hide. It's just not safe. There's a lack of emotional safety. And that withdrawing, all of a sudden, like a cosmic twisted dance of the universe, is the exact thing that triggers the anxious attached of the partner. So let's say the anxious attached woman is a common one, all of a sudden now feels abandoned, alone, not good enough, and that causes her to go into a coping strategy. She gets knocked back into a wound. Just went off a call with a client right now as I was walking her through this exact thing. 5 years old, feeling alone when mom and dad were completely separated because they were going through a trauma bond, and they were separated and they were trying to work through and meet other people. And she was sitting there as a 5-year-old going through the divorce, feeling alone and abandoned, just like when she was 5. And this woman, by the way, is divorced and she's got like an 8-year-old daughter. So the same thing is now happening. It's now passed to the next generation. It's not your fault. It just passes down to the next generation. Here she is now, after leaving a narcissistic relationship, hugely anxiously attached with an avoidant. And now she's like, every weekend where he's not texting, he's withdrawn because he's overwhelmed with whatever, because he's going through a divorce. She now makes it mean I'm not good enough. And her coping strategy is to go into criticism and blame and judgment. Why am I not a priority to you? Why is it that you can't message me? Why don't you message me? Like, am I not a priority for you? Why don't you think about me? Right? And that energy from the feminine she goes into the masculine, goes into judgment, goes into blame. And now she's in her masculine and fully activated by her anxious attached parts, which then, how does he receive it? How do you think he receives it? He then goes further into shutdown. And then goes further into coping strategies. Either he shuts down and submits and kind of goes away, or he escalates and says, "You, how dare you?" And then, which triggers her. And so can you see this pattern? It's called the infinite loop of doom. We talk about this at my overview experience, and I literally help people dismantle it. It's exhausting. The more that she pushes, the more he pulls away. The more he pulls away, just needing space, saying, why can't you understand? Why can't you just give me space? The very thing that they were attracted to in the beginning, which it was his independence and it was her need for connection and openness, is the very thing now that they're judging about one another. And this dance keeps going until finally she gives up and moves on, which then activates his abandonment wound. And then he comes in and goes, don't you love me? I love you. And then he starts coming on strong, which then causes her to open up and go back in. And then the second that intimacy happens, boom, he goes into overwhelm and withdraws again. And tell me if this lands or resonates for you. And it's exhausting, both for the anxious and the avoidant. The anxious people that I talk to, the women especially, are so offended. They're like, it's so disrespectful. It's so like there's this rage, this primitive rage that's reactionary. That and in Facebook groups, you hear people, my DA, my dismissive avoidant, my DA says so and so. So we go into these nasty labels and judgment. And the thing is that going into support groups and complaining about your DA who does this, playing the victim, is going to keep you further and further and further away from healing. And the reason why, if you're listening to this, it's because you've gone through the therapies. You've done the Byron Katie's and the John DeMartini's, and you've done your personal development work. You've done therapy, and you are ready to stop being a victim to this exhausting dance. And you're ready to take more of a bigger adult, compassionate look at all of this. And so essentially, if we don't get to the bottom of the answer essentially is to become trigger proof, is to learn how to expand that space between stimulus and response, and to learn how to resource those younger parts of you that you buried in the shadow, that you pretend that you're using the relationship to not feel, and to stop looking out there and to look within and to regulate with those younger parts and master these energies of polarity that happen within you, so that we can turn this unconscious polarity and we can turn it into an integrated conscious polarity with elegant boundaries, so that what happens is when these sensations come up, you're able to take a pause and reflect on what these younger parts are saying in those moments, and then bring them into safety yourself. That's the first key. And it takes a while to master this, because the second we get triggered, we abandon ourselves. If you don't text me back, immediately I go into, I must not be good enough. Even though with you not texting me back, you're not saying Nima's not good enough, but I go into the meaning of I'm not good enough. So it's me that abandons myself, and it's biological. Why do we abandon ourselves? Well, because as a child, when things go wrong or big emotions happen, we can't live in a world where we're the bad ones. It must be me as the bad one. It can't be my parents. I'd rather live in a world as a child, as a 3-year-old, as a 5-year-old, where I'm the bad one in a benevolent world than to be the good one in an evil world. So we are conditioned to abandon ourselves every time we get triggered. And what happens is that emotional pain is so vast that we then look to the outside to solve it. And this unconscious dance keeps going, and it keeps enraging. And some people stay in this power struggle for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years until you break up or divorce. That's essentially what happens. Most of the people who reach out to me, they give me the backstory. They're in the power struggle dynamic, and what they're ready to break free, and they get that it's not their fault, but it's your responsibility. One of the things people can't stand in the healing world is the word responsibility, and so those people are not my people. Responsibility doesn't mean it's your fault that it happened. It means it's an unconscious dance between two people. And when I saw this happen in my last relationship, I said, I don't care whatever distance I have to travel, whatever price I have to pay. I have to actually learn how to heal this, because I don't want to die not having experienced secure love. And that's when I learned the cognitive and the somatic practices. I actually retired from my chiropractic practice and started somatic training for about 18 months, just taking courses. I stopped working. I was like, I got to get to the bottom of this because I'm very smart. But why is my life not a demonstration of what I know up to be here? This is kind of like how good you are when you go out with your friend and you can, I've been watching Dr. Nima's videos. Here's what your problem is, but your life is a fucking disaster. I talked to this one person who reached out and wanted to chat and do kind of like a blind spot session. And she's like, yeah, I watch your videos and I tell all my friends and I know exactly what their problem is, but her in her own life, she was not living a demonstration of it. So knowing the work and embodying the work are two different things. And so you have to learn how to expand that space between stimulus and response and take responsibility for the activations that come up. And then that's what becoming trigger proof is all about. And then becoming elegantly boundaried. Elegantly boundaried means, especially if you're masculine, is letting the person know, hey, you know what? I know that you're emotionally dumping on me. I see that you're challenged. I have 10 minutes right now, and then I got to go, right? Being able to have the self-worth enough to be able to connect with your body and when it constricts and say, you know what? You're taking up a lot of time. I have about 10 more minutes. I'd love to hear what's going on. I have about 10 minutes, and then let's deal with it. And then I got to go. Right? Or as a woman, we're using feminine communication, which we teach, is that getting into your body and saying, can I share how I'm feeling? I'm feeling some fear right now. Can I have some help with that? Right? And starting more of a inner sharing with your boundaries, sharing what's coming up, not just fawning and people pleasing and bulldozing over what your body is saying. Right? So it really comes down to mastering the art of discernment. This is the most important skill that they don't teach us in school, is how to discern my wounding from my intuition. And that can only happen when you master the art of becoming trigger proof, which really is all about understanding my age regression when you trigger me, understanding which younger parts are coming up, understanding how to soothe them, how to resolve those and integrate, which means to understand and to bring home all of these shadow parts of me, these younger parts that I've pushed away, that are all dug deep in, the adaptations of me being able to survive my childhood. If I don't look at them, if I don't work through them, I get to replay them in my romantic partnerships. And that's the way it's supposed to be. If we don't, relationships are designed to bring up these younger parts. We're not entitled to having this relationship of your dreams that's going to be out there without first doing the inner work to resolve the relationships with these anxious and avoidant parts within ourselves. And once we do, we then become elegantly boundaried. I love that word. This is elegantly boundaried means I'm sharing with you what's important to me, but also keeping your heart in mind, right? So we're afraid of setting boundaries and we're afraid of having boundaries set for us. But there's a way of doing it in such a way where you share them vulnerably with somebody, where you can actually see how they're going to respond. And the way that they respond to your elegant boundaries without judgment, here's how is it elegant? You're not judging, you're not blaming. A boundary is about you. It's not about what the other person's doing. It's basically like saying, listen, I'm not available for the next 20 minutes to a call. But how about next week, right? I'm not available for that. I even set a boundary with my son today. It's like, no, Dominic, I can't let you tell your mother to shut up. See what I just did there? The boundary wasn't stop saying that to your mother. The boundary was, Dominic, I can't let you say that to your mother. And it's not an expectation for him to do anything. It's just, this is what it is. This is an elegant and really grounded boundary that's not apologetic. It's the answer to your fawning and your people-pleasing instincts. And it's a skill that we must practice for the rest of our lives. So we have to kind of get over these fantasies that the perfect relationship, I'm not going to have to set boundaries. It's not going to be uncomfortable. It's fucking uncomfortable to set boundaries with people. I do it almost every day where people are like, I want to get on a call with you. And I'm like, wait, hold on. Have you tried different things? Tell me what you've tried before. I'm not just going to give my time and energy just to anybody. I want to make sure that I'm talking to the right people, right? So then they get offended and then they turn on me. And so, this person is kind of like showing themselves the door to our lives. We have a very dysfunctional relationship with boundaries. And so becoming trigger proof, which is taking responsibility for the activations to self-soothe and self-regulate, and then communicating with really elegantly boundaried communication, polarized communication, after you've integrated, so that now, if you're a man, you can say, hey, you know what? I only have 15 minutes. Tell me if you're able to just keep the conversation up until this point. Or with feminine communication, you're sharing your feelings. Can I share how I'm feeling? I'm feeling really sad. I'm really scared. I'm making up a story that, the story that I'm making up is that, I'm a burden on you. Can I get some help? These really nuanced forms of communication, which I love teaching, and we cover at the overview experience for sure. This is exactly a skill that basically ensures that the relationships that you have are secure because you're secure with you, because you have the self-worth after integrating and then communicating, after taking responsibility for the trigger, after getting out of victimhood, getting out of blame, getting out of judgment, and not blaming them for your activation, just owning it, working to soothe it and regulate it, and then communicate it. These are high-level attachment skills. You want high-level relationships? It's a fantasy to think that you're just going to get them, they're just going to fall out of the sky. Are created through the rupture repair process. And that's the last thing that I wanted to share, is that the secure relationship is built over time through boundary violations that are repaired. Let me say that again. Relationships are built securely over time through boundary violations that are repaired. You and I, if we get into a relationship, a friendship, if I show up 10 minutes late and you don't say anything and it bothered you, I just violated your boundary. And you didn't let me know that that was a boundary violation. You didn't say it in a compassionate way. So I don't know that it's a problem. And then I can keep showing up late. And then all of a sudden you don't say anything. Then one day you ghost me. I'm like, what the fuck just happened? Why didn't you tell me? And then you say, you've been showing up late the last 10 times. Go fuck yourself, Nima. And I'm like, wait, what? What just happened? I didn't know. I have this habit. It's nasty. But you didn't tell me that it violated a boundary and give me an opportunity to repair. I just thought, okay, cool. Right? So can you see how nuanced it? Are they right? Am I right? Who's right? Who's wounded? Well, there was definitely a wound that that you're very entitled to feeling violated for that. But can you take responsibility for that and say, hey, Nima, listen, the last 2 times we hung out, you came late, both by 10 minutes, both times. And it brought up a lot for me. It brought up a lot for me. Reminded me of when I was so-and-so, and I don't want to have a relationship with somebody who's constantly going to be late. Tell me if we can work through this. I'll be like, shit, I didn't know. Yes, you know what? I have this nasty habit. It's something I do need to step up in. You got it. You're that important to me. See what just happened there? There was a boundary violation, but you shared it with me. I took ownership like a fucking adult and owned up to it and said, yeah. And then it gave me an opportunity to repair. What if you left and you didn't tell me? And then you went around telling everyone, oh, Nima shows up late. He's an asshole. And then you're a victim. Now you haven't gotten a lesson, right? And I'm giving you a really small example, but this is what elegantly boundaried actually means. This is what becoming trigger-proof means. These are high-level attachment skills. If we don't learn this, we just want to go isolate and just hide in the middle of the desert and just go, look, fuck, I just want to live with cats because it's just too damn complicated to be with humans because I'm too much of a victim and too lazy to actually pick up some high-level attachment skills. Because when you do, the people in your life are all high-level. They are human. They let you be human because you're not fucking perfect either. Neither am I. And can we both be human together and say, hey, look, we're both imperfectly human. And so we're going to both cross boundaries. And let's set the intention that when that happens, that we're going to talk about it, right? This is the vision that I have for our Cycle Breakers community, that we have a community of people that feel that they have the self-worth to speak their truth and the skills to be able to integrate and then communicate effectively. And they've done personal development work. You've done the therapies. So tell me what you get from this. Hopefully this was useful. There is a break from the anxious-avoidant cycle. There is an off-ramp. I love teaching it. It takes some skill. It takes some responsibility. It doesn't take you, taking on blame. This is nobody's fault, but you can upgrade. And when you do, the people around you start to step up. And those that aren't for you eventually fall off, which is sad, but it's part of growing up and being an adult, is learning how to grieve well And so if this lands with you, resonates with you, send me an email, hit reply, whatever you get. I'd love to hear what your takeaways are. And if you have any questions, or this is something that you want to see, if you have a blind spot here in the anxious avoidant dance, and you have any questions about attending the overview experience is where we literally break it down over 6 hours. In the first bit, I introduce this anxious avoidant dance, and then we go into nervous system regulation, and then we go into the practices of releasing that energy and then communicating effectively, and then dissolving the victim story so that you don't, this is for people who are sick and tired of feeling victimized. They acknowledge that they go there, but they don't want to live there. And you're tired of constantly going to a therapist and just having your story validated and reading all the books, but finding yourself stuck in that dance and you're actually ready to break free. Send me a message, give me your backstory, tell me all of the work that you've done in the past and things that have worked for you, what hasn't worked, and where the gap is, where you're frustrated. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about it and answer some questions for you. See you at the next perfect time.